Let's take a moment, sit up straight, leaving behind all the busyness of the day, feeling the peace of this temple, feeling the Master's presence. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, beloved God, Great Masters, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashai, Swami Shri Yukteswar, Paramahansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, we humbly bow at thy feet. Divine Mother, help us to feel your presence, as love in our hearts, as joy in our souls, and teach us to be perfect channels, of your love and joy, and share with everyone, whom we meet. Om. Peace.
Amen.
Thank you, Padma. So Boris Fritz has been with Self-Realization Fellowship for over 5 decades, and he's a nanotechnologist, he's an engineer, he is a philosopher, he is also a martial artist, and a teacher and a practitioner of martial arts. He has been studying the Yuga cycles for over 40 years, and we have really the honor of having him here. He came a few weeks ago, thanks to his wife who was shopping next door at the clothing store, so he didn't want to wait there, so he came by to just check this place out, and we met, we talked, and he called us a few weeks later, and he offered to do this presentation for us, and we are greatly indebted for that. And he has so much in his books. If I could go ahead and read all he has achieved, I think it will be a 2-hour presentation, and we may have to postpone his presentation for another day. So I will not take your time, so Boris, if you could go ahead and get started. Thank you so much.
Well, this is wonderful because it's nice to have a small group of people who are already, familiar with these ideas to some extent. You all know about Paramahansa Yogananda, and most of you follow his teachings, and so this is the kind of audience that I really love because I can get into some of the things that I wouldn't talk about in the general audience. And because for some people it's a little harder to understand some of these concepts because they're kind of foreign to a lot of people. And some of it is a little difficult to understand in the beginning because it is so unusual. I love teaching and working with students. Right now I'm at Loyola Marymount University teaching there in engineering, but retired from Northrop Grumman as an engineer recently. And but back in the 1960s, when I started SRF, I got interested in the Yugas right away, and since I was studying at the time, getting my bachelor's degree in philosophy and doing working on a master's and a doctoral work in history of religions at UCLA, I really got into the Yugas, and I used to go see Brother Dharmananda, who some of you may know. He passed away a few years ago, and he helped me a lot in understanding the Yugas and told me a lot of things about it. And at that time also he let me borrow all the old SRF magazines from the 1930s that had Taramata's articles on the Yugas, which were quite remarkable. And yeah, and he told me, don't lose those. If you do lose them, don't bother coming back. He was joking, but he wanted me to know this, don't lose them. And I did. Anyway, let me start here. Let me see how this works. Just from the beginning, I want to give you an idea about this whole concept that it was familiar to the ancients, even to the Greeks back 400 or 500 BC. They were still in touch with the Egyptians, and Solon, which was one of the lawmakers around 558, died 558 BC, but Solon, one of the lawmakers, rulers of Athens, he had visited the Egyptian priests and was asking them about their history. And here it says, a very old priest said to him, "O Solon, Solon, you Greeks are all children, and there's no such thing as an old Greek." "What do you mean by that?" inquired Solon. "You're all young in mind," came the reply. "You have no belief rooted in old tradition, and no knowledge hoary with age. And the reason is this: there have been and will be many different calamities to destroy mankind, and the greatest of them by fire and water, lesser ones by countless other means. This is the reason why our traditions here are the oldest preserved. But in our temples we have preserved from earliest times a written record of any great or splendid achievement. Whereas with you and others, writing at the other necessities of civilization have only just been developed when the periodic scourge of the deluge descends and spares none but the unlettered and the uncultured. So you have to begin again like children, in complete ignorance of what happened in our part of the world or in yours in early times." That's how we've been, now that we're rediscovering all that. "You remember only one deluge, though there have been many, and do not know that the finest and best race of men that ever existed lived in your country. You and your fellow citizens are descended from the few survivors that remain from Atlantis. The age of our institutions is given in our sacred records as 8,000 years, and the citizens whose laws and whose finest achievements I will now briefly describe to you, therefore, lived 9,000 years ago." And that was 500 BC when he said that. So, and we know that according to the Yugas, the last golden age was in that time around 10,000 BC. And that's in Plato's Timaeus. So, just to give you another little bit introduction, and I quote, Walter Crittenden is the one that holds the CPAC conference, a conference on precession and ancient knowledge. Some of you here have attended that, and it's now happening every other year. And that really is the subject on the Yugas, and Walter Crittenden is a long-time member at SRF. He's also been on the advisory board in Ananda. I am as well, and on the faculty. But he made all this kind of possible. He kind of brought me out because I'd been studying all this but never really had any place to show it. I thought of writing a book, which I'm planning to do. But then when he had his conferences, he invited me to speak, and that kind of really got me going. So I'm very grateful to him. And he said, like a patient with amnesia, mankind has forgotten his past, making it almost impossible to plan for the future. And this is really what we're talking about in part is archaeoastronomy. That is a field of archaic or ancient astronomy. And it's finally recognized as a field, and one of my friends here is actually studying that for an advanced degree, and just wonderful. And the information in these ancient texts on dates of the equinoxes and solstices are now starting to be taken seriously, and that means that history has to be rewritten. what happened, for instance, in the text, when I studied a lot of this in the 70s at UCLA for my doctoral work in the history of religions, people just ignored the specific dates, like when they said like the Pleiades are winter solstice, when the Pleiades are at the vernal equinox, that's a very precise time. And so if you go look that up in the new calculators that you have on the computer on dates, you know, when that particular constellation was at the vernal equinox, that's 8,500 BC. And some of the other dates like showed that it was the Vedas must have been around 10,000 BC, because that's what the astronomical data tells you. But in those days they didn't believe that. The scholars ignored it because Max Muller and some of that did all the sacred books of the East and all that, and at Oxford, they all still believed in the old idea of Bishop Usher of 4004 BC when the world was created. So, you know, even though he wanted to make it look old, he said, well, it's got to be around 1000 BC, you know, because you can't get too close to when the flood was and all these sort of things. So everybody still believed these old things of, you know, world being created 4004 BC. You know, it's kind of crazy to us now, but we're still dealing with these dates because of this. And so now they're starting to, you know, as generations go by and new scholars come along, they're now starting to accept this, but slowly, you know, it's crazy, you know. But one of the other things is satellite images of the dried up Saraswati River in India, which is really amazing. When they did the geological studies, when they saw, okay, we found the river, we found the satellite images, there's the dried up bed, we can see it. So then they go in there and they do geological studies of it, and they find out, well, it looks like 3000 BC, it already only flowed seasonally and dried up 1900 BC. But the Vedas speak of the Saraswati River as a mighty river. So it had to be before 3000 BC. That's before the Indus Valley civilization. You know, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, you've heard of those ancient civilizations in India. They were all supposed to be before the Vedic times. But now we know it's the reverse. Those people were there and they already knew about all that. So this is like, all this has to be rewritten. And one of the people that did a wonderful job, Hamlet's Mill, by George Santayana and Herta Foundation, they went and they found that over 30 ancient civilizations focused on precession as central, you know, to their culture. Why would they do that? You know, that's kind of strange. And so they found out that this Santayana and Herta Foundation, I mean, he's a professor of history of science at MIT. So, I mean, this is real scholarly work, but because it's such a deep book and kind of boring actually if you're reading through it, that it didn't get much publicity when it was published. But it should have been, because prior to that time, the people who did all these kind of studies of ancient myths and stories and all that, they were basically told, oh, you know, if it looks astronomical, don't worry about it. We don't deal with that. We're not astronomers, so it was ignored. So he said, no, it's time to look at this, because he's a historian of science. And so he found out that all these things, all these ancient myths from all over the world were very precise, like astronomical attempts to preserve these ideas. And so we owe a lot to this book. And so we're basically going to go through the great year in ancient civilizations. First, we're going to look at some of ancient India's keys to the Yugas, because India had the most, or has the most information that remained. India and China are the only two civilizations that went all the way through from the last higher ages all the way to the present time. They had their rough times, you know. China's going through communism and things. India went through, you know, conquest by Islam and by the British, and which kind of destroyed the ancient riches of India, you know. But then we're going to look at the system, these keys to the yugas. I don't have time to get into all of it in detail, but this is what really gives us the ability to understand what happened and what will happen in the future. So we'll really get more of a clear idea of what we'll see in the times to come, which makes it really fascinating. And then we'll apply the yugas to history. And now, first of all, in our society and in our culture, we are aware of the earth as like one day is 24 hours, and 12 hours of light, 12 hours of darkness. And where did we get that? You know, it's kind of funny because you have the 24,000 year full cycle of the yugas with the 12,000 years ascent, 12 descending. You know, you have that same, you've kept that same thing. Even the Babylonians already had it. And then that's one cycle. Then the next cycle, well, the orbit of the moon, the month. And then you have the annual orbit of the Earth around the sun. That's 1 year. But how does the sun move through the galaxy? Where we don't talk about those things. And we don't talk about, is there a binary star that we rotate around? And that's going to be central here. That's what Sri Yukteswar and the Holy Science made us really aware of. And both Walter Crittenden and myself and other people who study this, like Vyasa, Steinmetz, and Ananda, we all looked at this because Sri Yukteswar made us aware in the Holy Science. And now how does the sun move through the galaxy? Actually, the sun is 20 years old. It's gone around the galaxy 20 times. It takes 250 million years for one rotation around the galaxy of our solar system. And so that's kind of interesting. You know, so the sun's around 5 billion years old and going to last till about 8 billion years. In about 1 billion years, you know, it'll be expanded so far that the Earth will be burned up. You know, so our time is a little bit limited. So, now, the Western calendar is based on when Jesus was born. Then the Hebrew calendar based on Genesis, Islamic calendar based on the Hijra when Muhammad fled from his home place. And there's the old Hindu calendar, which is cyclical. That's the only one. And the new Hindu calendar, which is linear. So, now I already mentioned the Holy Science. Sri Yukteswar for the first time clarifies the proper length of the yugas and their link to history. And he helped us reconnect the yuga cycle to history itself. And then Taramata is the one who first started writing those yuga articles back in the 1930s. And I don't know how much of this was from Paramahansa Yogananda and Sri Yukteswar, but of course they must have told her quite a bit, and she was a very profound woman, so she figured a lot of these things out too, so we owe a lot to her. Oops, wait. Oh, okay. Good. So now let's talk about precession. I can't dwell on it too long, I have a lot of things to cover, but it's kind of critical to understand at least a little bit of it. Wait, there it is. Okay. it's a slow backward movement of the equinox against the background of the constellation of the zodiac. So originally people thought it was just a wobble of the Earth. Newton assumed that it was that wobble of the Earth's axis that produced the precession cycle. But according to Sri Yukteswar, the whole solar system is going to have this precession. And because it's based on us going around another star, and we're orbiting each other while we're going around the galaxy. And this rotation is an elliptical orbit. That's why the 4 ages are not the same length, because of the elliptical orbit. But at the same time, it's going, it's not just rotating around the galaxy, but it's also going closer and further away from the Pleiades, specifically Alcyon. I'll talk more about that, but that's, there are these influences that change our consciousness, and I'll get into this here in a moment. But to understand the precession, really, if you're one of these ancient astronomers and you were to look, like some of them, like Stonehenge and other places, like the Mayan pyramids and things, they have a way of aligning the sun when it rises on like the vernal or the autumnal equinox, and when that particular star rises at that time, that's like at the vernal equinox, that's the sign of spring, but that's on March 21st. But when that happens, each year, that constellation that they're seeing there, year after year, moves slightly backward. Instead of like the constellation, the 12 signs of the zodiac are going around, you know. And here we're seeing that it's just a little bit backed up each year. But so little that after 72 years, it's only backed off 1 degree. Imagine that. If you're an ancient civilization, and you know your father shows you, look, you're the astronomer now, you know, you're going to look through this hole or this alignment here, and you know, like his father's already watched it, and he says, okay, it's right there, and then you watch it and you mark that spot where it reflects maybe on the rock or something, and well, you might see after 72 years, it's, you know, in a 360-degree circle, 1 degree. I mean, that looks, oh, that's just, you know, the light's funny. It's, you know, no one would even notice that after a century. And yet these people figured out that this is a 24,000-year cycle through the entire zodiac, and they understood it, and they based their civilizations on it because they said that's what creates the rise and fall of the ages. And so that's pretty amazing in itself. They must have been pretty advanced to figure that out, right? And I think people take that for granted sometimes, and they shouldn't, you know. So, let's see. There we go. So now, when you look at you mentioned the sun as part of a binary star system, and all the ancient civilizations, many of them, over 30 of them too, they talk about Sirius as being the binary star. It's the brightest star in the sky. I think it's around 87 light years away, something like that. I forget exactly. But the idea is that that's our binary, and we rotate around each other in an elliptical orbit. And as we're doing that, we're coming closer and further away from the Pleiades, which is, like Sri Yukteswar said, is the Vishnu Navi, like the center power from which these spiritual influences come to us that bring us into higher ages and lower ages as we go away from it. And what's interesting is, like, even in Job, the book of Job, which is considered the oldest book in the Old Testament, God is telling Job, kind of correcting him, like, what can you really do? I am God. I'm the one who makes all this happen. And he says, canst thou bind the sweet influences of the Pleiades? That is, are you as a man able to stay in the golden age where everything is perfect, the sweet influences of the golden age? You can't bind that. You have to go through the cycle that I ordained, right? And so even in the Bible talks about that. There's another place in Daniel, which I don't have time here, where they have the dream. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream which talks about exactly the four ages with the gold, the silver, the bronze, and the iron. And so if you know what to look for, you see it, And in the Wine of the Mystic by Master, Master says the Pleiades contain Alcyone, the star that the ancient considered to be the central pivot of the universe. So I think what's meant is, you have the galaxy, you have there are larger cycles and smaller cycles, but the cycle that's important for us, the one that affects our history, is this 24,000-year cycle. And you wonder, well, why are we really influenced by these kind of effects, like low electromagnetic frequencies? I mean, they talk about these harmonic frequencies that come from the stars and affect us. And it turns out that, like, Professor Valerie Hunt at UCLA did studies on the effects of electromagnetic fields on test subjects. And they've also done, like, this cranial magnetic stimulation in the lab, where they found out that they could make, by bringing electromagnetic stimulation to certain parts of the brain, they could make a person able to do complex mathematical calculations in their head that they couldn't do otherwise. And so, yeah, these things have a definite effect on us. And blocking those fields, that became, like, when you're in a Faraday cage, people become very nervous and close to a nervous breakdown because they have to be in this field that's nourishing us. And there's a lot of studies now being done. Up before that time, like 30 years ago, it was still considered kind of weird, and it was hard for professors to study this area, but now it's an accepted subject. And one of the things that happened to me, when I was at Occidental College, I was in a big crowd of people that are going into class and things. So I asked one of the monks, what do I do about keeping my own vibration and not be affected by all these students? And the brother told me, well, haven't you heard about the Om Tat Sat? And actually, let me hold that one for later on. I was just thinking of another thing. When I asked him about this, one of the other things I learned was a technique to bring the energy up to the brain, and to just kind of transmute everything up and make your brain really opened up, And so I was practicing this when I was at Occidental College, and at one point, all of a sudden, I felt more and more like my whole brain was radiating light. I almost felt like I had to stretch my feet to touch the ground. It was this really wonderful state. And then I'd been meditating a lot of hours at the time, and so I hadn't really studied much, and I had this huge test coming up in the history of civilization, and we had to read like 4 books. One of them was a Nova Morgana by Sir Francis Bacon. Really deep books. And I noticed for the first time in my life, I opened the book and I could just read just glance at each page and flip, flip, flip. In a matter of no time at all, I had gone through all 4 books. But I understood them so deeply that the next day on the test, I was able to come up with kind of a synthesis of the 4 books on a history, on like a way of looking at history, that the paper was passed around to all the professors. They were so impressed by it. And I'd never done anything like that before. But it's because of this technique of bringing the energy up here that changed everything. And so what's so neat about it is exactly here. We don't have to wait for the higher ages. We've been given these techniques so that we can, go into the higher ages ourselves, not wait for humanity, for the whole culture. And we can transcend the yugas and be free of the yugas and, go to the higher states, which I'll cover later. But unfortunately, this state didn't last, so. But, these things are little blessings that we get at times that really help us to see what we have and what's possible. And so here, the cycle of the ages, like the seasons of a year, based on the precession of the equinox, and you can see there, this is the 12,000 year descending cycle, and this is the 12,000 year ascending cycle. And so what's happening is that here's the last golden age from that last 4,800 years. And it started at 11,500 BC. That was the height of the last golden age. And that's in the constellation here. So you have Aries and Pisces. That's the area here. There's some people that have it reversed. That's why some people say we're in the age of Aquarius, which is really here. It means whether you use the autumnal or the vernal equinox, I believe. And so right now, so you have 4,800 years, then you have 3,600 years of the Silver Age, then 2,400 years of the Bronze Age. Now, bronze doesn't have anything to do with the archaeological Bronze Age they talk about. This is specifically here, because remember, Plato spoke about the gold, silver, bronze, and iron ages, and talking about the ancient golden age. And so that's what we're referring to here. And the Sanskrit words for those are the Satya, Treta, Dvapara, and Kali Yuga. And so the Kali, the Dark Age, is 1,200 years descending. And then when you're at rock bottom, which is really 500 AD, then you start to reverse slowly in the ascending Iron Age. This is the 12,000 years going upward. And then you come to the Dvapara Yuga of 2,400 years. And this is actually wrong here. How about that? Okay. Anyway, we're about right here. We haven't gone very far, so that's the bad part. And then we go, but by 4,000 AD, we're going to start the next Silver Age. And then we come up and in 7,600 AD, we start the next Golden Age. So that gives you some idea. We'll talk more about this. And in the Laws of Manu, the Manava Dharma Shastra, it gives the exact lengths that we've just discussed. I won't go through this. Okay, here are the times. And what's happening is you have the Golden Age, you have a 400-year transition. So if you're in the descending cycle, you've got 400 years of transition from the top into the downward going cycle. And then you have 400 years transitioning out of the Golden Age to the start of the Silver Age, and 300 years transition. These transitions are there to adjust to the next age. It's kind of like a buffer. And usually in these transitions, there are also calamities, because you can't have people of a lower consciousness handling higher types of powers. There comes a lot of responsibility with more power. You know, you have to have it. Like you can't give the Vikings a nuclear submarine. That goes very well. So I think that kind of makes it clear. And here, this is where we can see a little bit better. In this diagram, actually from the Holy Science, I believe, it shows here's this present position where we are approximately, and here are the different constellations, the descending, the ascending arc. So again, you see kind of what I've just talked about. And now what's really important is that how do we know what part of these yugas we're in? Why did the people in India think we're in Kali Yuga right now? You know, they kept saying we're in Kali Yuga. And Sri Teshwar says, no, you know, there was a big mistake that was made back 702 BC, which is the time when he says, was the war of the Mahabharata, and at the end, King Yudhishthira, you know, the Pandava brothers, King Yudhishthira and his whole court left the kingdom to his grandson Parikshit to rule the kingdom, because they said that Kali Yuga was coming, and this is the first year of Kali Yuga. We're going to the Himalayas and meditate because we don't want any part of Kali Yuga, the Dark Age. And so they left, and all the wise men with them, and then King Parikshit with the people that were left said, well, nobody wants to start the Kali Yuga. And so what happened is that the calendar, that cyclic calendar in India right now is, I think, we're in 2015, so it'd be 2017 in the Hindu calendar, 5017, because here if you see, if you add these things up, like this was in 2009 when I made the chart, if you go 3102 BC, and then add 2009 years after of the Christian era, together you get this calendar year of date of the Hindu calendar, but they call it Kali Yuga, 5111 Kali Yuga. Now, the reason that they made that mistake is because at that time King Parikshit did not want to start at year one. In 3102, that was the end of the last silver age, of the last. The higher ages are, like the gold and the silver age is when life is really great. After that, you know, the bronze age and the iron age aren't so great. And anyway, so what happened is in 702 BC, when they should have, the 2400 years of the Dvapara Yuga were over, and now they should have started with year one of Kali Yuga, which they didn't. They just kept the 2400 years from 3102 BC, and then they just kept on going to 2401, 2402, through the whole 700 years of downgoing Dark Age, then the 1200 years of the ascending Yuga, and then into our age. And so that's what, but the beauty of all this is that we can trace it back right there to 3102 BC, when people still knew what they were doing. They knew they were ending the Silver Age, going into the Bronze Age, and so they started year one of Dvapara Yuga in 3102 BC. And it's just that when after 2400 years, when the Dark Age started, nobody wanted to admit it, and so they kept on counting. And they just kept on counting all the way to 5,117 now. So that's what went wrong. And so we have this proof that takes us right back to the last Treta Yuga, when they still understood the Yugas. And the interesting thing is the Mayans also trace their calendar back to 3100 BC, and so do the Hebrews. Isn't that interesting? Everybody seemed to know something was going on, whether it was in ancient America or in Asia. So, and now one other interesting thing is Sirius. We talked about that all these ancient people thought that that was our binary star that we rotated around. And first of all, what's interesting is that like 30 years or even 20 years ago, astronomers sort of said, well, how many stars are binary stars? Well, it turns out that like 80% or more of all stars are binary stars. So you'd expect our star to have a binary. Like some of these, like Sirius actually has 3 stars, I believe, and so that rotate around each other. Sirius A and B and one other. Could be wrong. I can't remember now. But anyway, I'm not an astronomer. I may be an engineer, but I'm not an astronomer. But anyway, what's interesting is that Professor Buchwald from Caltech noticed that Sirius didn't go through the precession like the other stars, which is pretty interesting. So you think if this is our binary, then it's like if we're on a carousel and we're on opposite sides of the carousel, but we're spinning on the same thing, then everything else might be precessing, but we're staying the same. So that's kind of the idea. So very interesting. So now the great year, the Greeks, Egyptians, the Vedic Indians, the Mayans, the Hopi, that's that over 30 ancient civilizations have this idea of the great year. And the ancient Greeks, they believed in the same cycle of time, and we've already mentioned that. And Hesiod, one of the Greeks there, talked about the golden age, men lived like gods, all things were theirs. They harvested their fields in contentment and in abundance, and then he says, but now things have declined, and now is truly a race of iron, and men never rest from labor and sorrow by day, So he understood this, and the Greeks were pretty clear about it. And then ancient Egypt, they spoke of Zep-Tepi, or the first time. And a lot of their, as I read that original remark of Solon visiting the ancient Egyptian priest, so they were very clear, with their history. And like the Egyptian priest Manetho, he lived around 3rd century BC, had this extensive king list, which actually adds up to 24,000 years of the king list that they had preserved. So, and of course, India had the most information on the cycle. And what's interesting is that India has long, in their scriptures, long been understood that it has deeper meaning. So it wasn't meant to be just a thing you read as is. And one of the things, the Sandhya Bhasha is this twilight language. I did my master's degree on Tantrism, pre-Tibetan Buddhist Tantrism. And in there I found out about Sandhya Bhasha. And it's about this, like the way they wrote their scripture was with deeper meaning. On purpose, and so because they felt that language was incapable of expressing the highest experiences of life. But you really can't express it through words, you really can't understand it through the mind. And so that's already like one proof, so to say, in India. Like when I studied the Gita, Sanskrit, all that at UCLA, they usually say, well, the scholars feel that you have to take it at face value. It's about this battle, in Kurukshetra and all that. But everybody else in India talks about the deeper meanings. And so what's beautiful in the autobiography of a yogi by Ananda, it says the Mahabharata epic has several knot points. Keep the knot points unquestioned and we find only mythical stories. Leave the knot points unexplained and we lose the science that India has preserved with superhuman patience after a quest of thousands of years of experiment. So that's really important. I also meant to say the Rig Veda, Samhita, the oldest of the Vedic texts, speaks about the 4 ways of interpreting the Vedas. Only the first way is understandable by those without wisdom. So there are deeper, obviously deeper meanings. And now one of the interesting things is that, how does this consciousness, what is the goal? What are we trying to achieve with all this? And the idea is this evolution of man through these cycles and also of transcending these cycles to final liberation. And right at the time of when the Dvapara Yuga transition was over in 1900, actually 1898, 1900, is when Dr. Buke wrote this book, Cosmic Consciousness, a study in the evolution of the human mind. And he noticed that man's cosmic sense is increasing with the ascending cycle. But he wasn't aware of the yugas at all, but he just noticed more and more people were having these spiritual experiences. And what's nice is that, first of all, he had a cosmic experience that changed his life, and he thought the city was on fire, and then he realized this conflagration of bliss was happening inside of him, and he was never the same after that. And he was a close friend of Walt Whitman as well. And but he noticed that it's not necessarily religious people who have these experiences, but also other normal people, and also like King Ashoka or King Akbar, the great king around 1500 or so in India. He was around 30 years old. He had this went through like states of samadhi and things, and that's why he was such an incredible ruler, both the Hindus and the Muslims, and kept them both, respected both, and kept them both, inspired. Wonderful king. And so he brought that out, made people aware it's not necessarily prophets, it's other people too that have these kind of experiences. And there's always at least one enlightened soul at beginning or during each of the 4 ascending and descending ages that, these cultures don't happen by chance. They're brought about by these beings that control the ages. Like we know Babaji is in charge of overall, making these things happen. And then just wanted to briefly mention Out of the Darkness, From Turmoil to Transformation by Steve Taylor. He went around and found out that a lot of people were having permanent experience of enlightenment. And I wasn't even aware of this. I just figured, we're all struggling, trying to reach these deeper levels, and I've been on the spiritual path, most of my life now, and but I'm not enlightened yet. I'm on the way. But here he found people that have actually had this experience, and they were completely, permanently transformed. And to read about that is quite interesting. And then Robert Foreman spoke at the Inside Edge. Adrian is one of the people that makes those things happen. And she told me, he was there, and you should talk to him. So I called him up and had some conversations with him. Very interesting. But enlightenment ain't what it's cracked up to be. The journey of discovery, snow and jazz and the soul. It sounds really funny, and he does have a good sense of humor, but it's a serious book. And what it's really saying is that well, he had been very depressed when he was, I think, at Princeton studying, and he started doing, just like 40 years ago, he started doing the Maharishi's transcendental meditation. And he went on a 9-month intensive in Mallorca with the Maharishi, and all of a sudden, after 2 months of meditating 4 or 5 hours a day, suddenly parts of his brain became completely silent, then more and more, until finally utter silence. His mind had stopped. Of course, that's the goal of yoga, is to stop the churning of the mind, and then God consciousness appears. You know? And so he started going into these states permanently, and now even after 40 years, he's noticed how it's expanded, where the people around him and animals, everything are part of his consciousness. He's always in that state. He doesn't sleep like other people. He says that, like, if his son calls him at 3 in the morning or something because he needs something or whatever, like an emergency, there's no transition to wakefulness. He's already there. There's no, you know, it's just he's always in that awareness. And so, very interesting. And then I try to understand this in terms of what Paramahansa Ananda has taught us. And now think about this, and I shouldn't take so much time on this, but it's pretty important. When you usually think when a person studies under a guru, you know, and here Master was studying with Sri Yukteswar for 10 years before he went out into the world. The usual thing you think, okay, he studied for 10 years, he got samadhi and enlightenment, and then he's sent out to the world. That's not what happened. After 6 months of being with Sri Yukteswar, he's given enlightenment. Of course, he had enlightenment in previous lifetimes, but he's a living scripture, so to say. He's teaching us, you know, by his example. But after 6 months, he gets enlightenment. And what do you think happens in the next chapter? The cauliflower robbery, remember? He forgets to close the ashram gate. He's enlightened, but he forgot to close the ashram gate. This is what he's talking about. You may have reached enlightenment, but now you have to integrate it into your everyday life. That's the example, right? And so you go, Master went like 9.5 years more with Sri Yukteswar, and then he went out into the world. He's an avatar, you know. I mean, at a low age, you need a lot of, you know, help, so to say, I guess. You know, of course, it's also an example, you know. So, but you see what I'm getting at? That once you do reach enlightenment, you have to integrate it, and that's what he talks about. I think that's a really tremendous book. He asked me to write a review on of his book on Amazon, which I did. And here, this is just a joke. It's if you're too busy to meditate, try the Buddha patch. I'm achieving enlightenment while I clean my toilet. Available in capsule, gel, and suppository. We wish it were that easy. I always have to throw these things in. So now the ancient India's wisdom of the Yugas, one of the things is the caste system. One of the Brahmins, you know, nowadays it's been, it's all wrong because people are born into a caste, which is wrong. These 4 different ways of being is like would be determined what that person is at the beginning, like how they behave. You determine which caste they belong to, which works best for that person. And but the idea is that you have these different ways of interpreting the yugas, and they're always in the right order. That's what you need to understand. Always in the proper order. So you have the Shudras, the servants, manual labor, slavery. That's Kali Yuga, the dark age, when people work with their hands. They manual labor. They're stuck in the body consciousness. Then the next age, the Dvapara Yuga, Vaishyas, merchants, business, corporations. We're now in that Dvapara Yuga, in that business age, where there's a lot of energy going outwards. And then the next age, the Silver Age, is the age of the Kshatriyas, the warriors. That is, you become a spiritual warrior to overcome your weaknesses and to find God. And then finally, in the Golden Age, the majority of people are Brahmins, they're priests, sages, they have that state of consciousness. And what's interesting is that in the Indo-European languages, they all can't get into the tripartite too much. That's the last three. The Vaishnava Sutras are kind of thrown together, but all the Indo-European languages show this tripartite division of the priests, warrior, and merchants and farmers. And you find that everywhere in all Indo-European languages like English, Celtic, Hittite, Sanskrit, Greek, Iranian. And so what's interesting, all these countries' flags that have Indo-European languages, they tend to have the three colors that reflect that. And even the American flag, the white stands for the spiritual, that the founders actually of our country actually said. The white represents the spiritual, the red represents our valor, but the blue was different. It was actually more for the judicial. So it didn't quite correspond. But then, like, there's the German flag up there, you know, black, red, and yellow, and you have the kind of the three colors. But then you notice the Russian flag, the Soviet Union, has all red, which means you know, military, and the idealism is the hammer and sickle of the working class, you know. So you can see that reflected. But then when the Soviet Union fell, they have a new flag now, which again reflects the three colors. So I think that's some hope there. But I know that you can't read too much into these things, but it's interesting. So then, Patanjali's Eightfold Path, there again, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, meaning yoga or union with God takes place when the churning of the mind is stopped. And the chitta is really the part that gets your emotions, your mind, your emotional mind. And once you stop that, then you reach that breathless state. But in Kali Yuga, the Dark Age, reflects the first two, yama and niyama. So people in the Dark Age, it's like being in kindergarten. You know, the kids have to be kept in line because they misbehave. They don't know how to behave because you're in body consciousness. You know, you don't have that deeper state. So that's why in Kali Yuga, people don't behave properly, and so they need these moral conducts and observances to keep in line, and they can't understand the deeper things as well. You see that in Christianity and in Islam. You know, as long as you follow all these rules, and they're very, like, the whole idea of Roman law and Islamic law and, you know, and all that, it's all about behavior. You know? So then you get the Dvapara Yuga, but it's always the deeper part there. Each religion always gives you everything you need for those people who are ready for it. But anyway, then Dvapara Yuga, the Bronze Age, you have the average person is practicing yoga postures and breathing, like doing Tai Chi. In fact, I found out 20 million people in the U.S. are meditating right now, as of 2012. That was in the Yoga Journal. That's pretty amazing. You know, I started in 1964 when I was considered pretty weird, you know, to be meditating. But now it's pretty common, you know. So people in this age, in these next 2,000 years, are going to become very good at this control of the life force. But in Treta Yuga, the average person will be able to withdraw their energy from the senses at will and go very deep, you know, into inner type of developing inner powers. It's like the age of the sorcerers, so to say, of magic, that we think of as magic. And then Sandhya Yuga reflects the last two, dhyana and samadhi. Where the average person will be in that state of super consciousness. And very interesting is the four ideas of creation that Sri Yukteswar talks about. Om, Kala, Desha, and Anu, and these reflect the 4 yugas as well. So you have the Kali Yuga, the Dark Age, is all physical matter, a birth of physical matter. Then Desha, space, is the next age that we've just entered. It's the age where we conquer distance, through telegraph, telephone, through television, through space travel. We've been to the moon and Mars and some of the other planets, and so that we're going to conquer space. We're going to reach the stars in this age. And then you get to the next age, the Silver Age is the age where we conquer time. And that's a strange one that's hard for us to comprehend. These people are so far beyond us, we don't have the brain power for that yet. But it's really, most of this is beyond the mind. And then the Om vibration, that's in the Golden Age, we have that understanding of the Om. And when you think about the 4 ideas of creation, these are the elders before the throne of God. This is what creates Maya, those 4 ideas. And you think of like a sine wave of a vibration. That sine wave has distance. Distance. It has it's a vibration, and it takes time to go from one part of the sine wave to the next of that vibration. And it's also a physical thing because, like we know in quantum mechanics, the wave and the particle, it's all interchangeable. So it's pretty deep. Then, as I mentioned before, the culture doesn't just happen. There's Kingsley, his book, The Story Waiting to Pierce You, Mongolia, Tibet, and the Destiny of the Western World. Very profound. Civilizations never just happen. They are brought into existence quite consciously with unbelievable compassion, determination from another world. And what happens is that at the beginning of each age, it's a descending cycle. The prophet or whoever comes at the beginning of that downgoing cycle will try to preserve what they had before that. Then in an ascending cycle, then a prophet who comes will try to bring you what's going to be the next age. Like our guru, Ananda, brought us to the point, gave us the techniques of the Silver Age to lift us to that level. But he also gives us, to go completely beyond. Like all religions always give you that inner teaching to take you all the way. So now we're going to look at the 4 ages, and we'll start kind of where the history is still familiar to us, where our history books are still accurate from like the last descending Bronze Age, then go into modern times and all the way around, and then back down from the last cycle. So now this last descending Vapara Yuga reflects the science, outer exploration. There's the 3 gunas, the tamas, rajas, and sattvas. I don't know if you've heard of that, but this is tamas is the slothful, low energy type of dark energy. It makes you weak, kind of. It's part of the dark age. Then you have the rajas, which is the passionate, the energizing portion of the gunas, and then you have sattva, which is the ennobling, wonderful qualities that lift you up, and that goes like for the golden age. But all 3 interact within us in some way. And so in the downgoing age, you have this passion, but it's kind of has some darkness in it. And people are still doing meditation. They still have control of the prana and things, and they are doing space travel to some degree. They did a lot of it in the higher ages, but even in Vapara Yuga, in that age, down going. You still, like in the Hindu scriptures, some of the Mahabharata and some of the other scriptures talk about spaceships, about some of the kings having these ships to use for war and other things, but not very many of them. It's like you realize they don't even know how to use them that well anymore. So those things are disappearing. Now we're kind of starting at that point in history of the last descending Dwapara Yuga, the last Bronze Age. And at that was like, remember that after the Silver Age ended, 3102 BC, so we're going 3102 to 702 BC, which is the 2400 year part of the Dwapara Yuga. And so one of the things that's interesting, if we look at the Minoan civilization in Crete, the famous palace there in Knossos around 2000 BC, it's a 5-acre palace, and they had toilets with running water, which is quite, remarkable. I mean, they had this kind of thing in ancient Sumer. You also had it in Indus Valley civilization. And people all had toilets, You didn't have toilets anymore in the Dark Ages, and it didn't come back till like 1700 during the transition back into our Bronze Age, when Alexander Cummins invented the first water closet. So that's very interesting. And I mean, they had all the piping, the plumbing, the whole bit, and. Let's see. Interesting too is that we never deciphered their language, Linear A, but then Linear B, the Mycenaean Greeks, the Mycenaeans were the early Greeks, and they wrote in Linear B, and we did decipher that and realized it was Greek, but then later on, the Mycenaeans lost the ability to read their own script. This kind of thing that happens in a downward cycle. You don't see that happening in an upward going cycle. And you also see that, like, the Indus Valley script and things disappeared gradually. Nobody knew how to read that anymore, and it wasn't until much later that writing appeared again. So, one of the other things is at that time, this ancient Greek computer, this was actually in Scientific American, they talked about their research about it because they found it off the coast of in the Mediterranean. It had been, it was a shipwreck, and they found it, they didn't know what it was. It wasn't until we got more refined with our ability with X-rays and things to look into this thing. We found out that it was a complex type of computational device that actually had internal elliptical gears. We didn't have elliptical gears till the late Renaissance with the clockmakers, that they got better and better. But here we find this in, like 2,000 years older, and evidently it was like one of the last ones that goes back in time from previous times, and we don't really know how ancient it is, but I mean it represented the motions of the planets, predicted eclipses. It was like a celestial tracking device, and just incredibly remarkable. We're finding more and more of this side of thing that doesn't fit with our usual idea of linear history. The other thing was the Baghdad battery. They also found that's also from that time. The Baghdad, they found a number of these, and it actually generates more voltage than Volta's battery that he supposedly invented, electricity and batteries in Italy in 1700s or so, again during that transition into our age. But here we find the ancient one, and they think a lot of the gold that we find from ancient times may have actually been done through electrolysis and not be solid gold, because they found these batteries. So imagine that, So they, it's like once you get into the Dark Age, electricity and magnetism are no longer understood. The electrical age is our age. And also what's interesting is that we use chemical fertilizers, right, for agriculture. But the ancient used the magnetic fields of the earth, the geomagnetic fields. And in Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty, Robert Burke, who some of you met at CPAC, he passed away a few years ago, unfortunately, but he started examining these things because he was doing this type of research for a company in the United States, of seeing what kind of effects magnetic fields have on seeds to make them grow faster and that sort of thing. And then he was traveling in England at not Stonehenge, Avebury, I think, and the bed and breakfast he was staying at, he had all this equipment. He had a voltmeter and what's it called, the flux magnetometer. And the guy at the bed and breakfast said, "Hey, you should check these things out, see what there is," because it turned out that all these rocks, the way they were placed, all went in specific. The magnetic field went in one direction, all circular, and that's, you can't have by accident. That was something the ancients had put there, and so he began to realize that they did these things on purpose. And then he tested it, and he found out that these seeds, like even in the Mayans, still the Indians still go up on top of their pyramids to put these seeds overnight, because it makes them resistant to parasites. It makes them grow much faster and larger. And then it turned out it was only the older pyramids. The later pyramids that were built, they had lost that ability, and so they didn't do that anymore. Primarily from 1500 BC and earlier, all the pyramids had that kind of capability. And then from there we go into Kali Yuga, the Dark Age. The Dark Age is like, in terms of the Indian, six systems of Indian philosophy, the first one is the Aya, which is logic. Focus on, take things at face value and let logic solve your problems. Because people don't understand intuition at that level. And so, also this is the age of tamas, of darkness, inertia. And Shudra, the servants, the laborers. It's slavery. Slavery is common in the Dark Age. It starts to disappear in the higher ages. You go from sacred acts to sacred words. Why is that? That's why my professor always wondered, why is this happening? All around Asia and Europe, in the Americas it took longer, but that also happened. But the idea is, why does the whole world change from ritual to ethics-based religions? And a few years ago it came to me that imagine if you're in the higher ages and you're kind of in the downward going cycle, and you're in the Bronze Age, Dwapara Yuga, where things are starting to disappear, and say you have this cosmic sense inside of you, and you have all these rituals that you do, because these rituals that you've grown up with have to do with maintaining the earth, maintaining this harmony in the world. And that's part of your job in the higher ages. But once you start descending into a body consciousness, when the Dark Age begins, you lose all that. This cosmic sense is gone, and you're stuck in this body, and you start to no longer know what's right and wrong. This is when you need the Bible to tell you what to do, kind of. You need people to help you, to keep you in line, so to say, so you don't go off the deep end. And so So you're going from attunement and meditation to body consciousness, and so once you've lost that sense, things, now you need the ethical stuff. You need the things to tell you what to do. And so, so we go from cosmic maintenance to words and morality. So here, like, first of all, Zoroastrianism comes along, and good versus evil, this focus, life based on moral choices, empathization, everything is understood in terms of moral behavior, right? Because when you're in the spirit, when you're in this deeper state, you know what's right and wrong, because when you do something wrong, you lose that inner attunement, and you realize you have to get it back. But when all that's gone, what have you got? You need someone to tell you what to do. And so, like Confucius came along, he even mentioned, Confucius says in his Analects about in the Golden Age, how people knew how to behave, but now in this age they don't. And after Confucius taught his morality, then legalism came along and says, well, that's not enough, we have to keep you in line, and they became very strict. And so Jainism, you have ahimsa, anekanvada. Anekanvada is the idea of many-sidedness. He says, if you're not enlightened, you better be open and understanding with other people, with other people's beliefs, because you don't have the answer yourself. So be open and respect other people. And ahimsa is nonviolence, as you know. And Mahatma Gandhi was deeply influenced by Jainism. And then in India, they went from Brahmanism to Hinduism. That is, karma used to be a ritual act, it became a moral act. And again, this ethicization, the personal moral responsibility, because that's what people understood in that age. So, and it's interesting, even Judaism gradually stops sacrifice. Remember, they used to sacrifice the lamb and sacrifice the bull and all that. All these things stopped because people no longer understood what was behind it. There are things that we don't really understand now anymore, but there was this sense of cosmic maintenance that we did, that in the highest ages, I think, we have responsibility to keep maybe the planet Mars in its proper orbit. That would be part of our job, those kind of things. Those are beyond us now. Then Buddhism came along and to break up the caste system was becoming hereditary, to focus on equality, which is very important in Kali Yuga, and to stop the focus on ritual was no longer, you had lost that ability to do cosmic maintenance. So, and Buddhism, Jainism broke off with the authority of the Vedas. Now I was wondering, Buddha doesn't like being, why did he, break off from the authority of the Vedas? And then I realized later, well, nobody can understand it, it would just be misused, so why focus on it? And Taoism also went from what became empty ritual. It was meaningful ritual when you had the spiritual depth, but later on, you had to look for the more moral kind of things. And then in the descending Iron Age, then Plato and Aristotle reduced the intuitive wisdom of Parmenides to the logic of the syllogism. Like all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. Or was one of my favorites. All things are relative. Some relatives are things. My relatives took all my things. But anyway, this idea of logic, nyaya, is the prevailing thing in the Dark Age because the deeper stuff is gone. Now we have things like fuzzy logic, the deeper, like mathematical things that are go much further than what we were able to do in the Dark Age. And Plato was a follower of the Pythagorean and Orphic mysteries. He knew what he was doing, I think, when he set all this up, because you realize people in that age things had to be, simplified from the deeper things. I mean, Socrates actually would go into deeper states of consciousness, and they had that, but they realized for what's coming, they had to give something that meaningful to the people of that age. And then Jesus comes along and tries to go beyond Iron Age limitations, the true meaning of being born again. But he was born like, he lived, of course, preaching around age 30 AD or somewhere around there. That's like still 500 years of downgoing cycle to the bottom before the upgoing dark age. So he had a hard job to do, and he tried his best to, preach proper action, proper behavior, and get people kind of going, doing good things. But it wasn't easy. Of course, he had the deeper teachings as well. Then at that time, in that descending Iron Age, the Roman Empire, the Chinese Han Dynasty, the Indian Gupta Empire all ended near the bottom of the Kali Age, around 498 AD, 500 AD. They all declined because of the barbarian invasions like the Huns, less capable rulers, economic stagnation, disease, unwillingness of citizens to serve in the army, tax evasion. Like the Roman Republic, until about the time of Christ, until Caesar and stuff, things were still pretty good, but then around 100 BC was the first murder. Caesar is killed, and then other murders, and like a lot of Roman emperors didn't make it very long, and all that violence started. And then the Dark Ages, our history of these times are imperfect. There were few places where men could write, little encouragement to write at all. We know enough to tell this age was not an age really of war and robbery, but of famine and pestilence. And actually, and because of that energy, and Justinian had taught them to bring in people with real ability, not just to bring in your relatives to run the place, And that made a big difference. And so the Eastern Empire actually lasted till 1453 AD when Islam took it over. And now, I always thought, why did Islam have to come along and kind of wreck everything, as a Westerner talking, it's kind of unfair, but because it changed history dramatically when he came along. And within 50 years of Muhammad's death, the entire ancient world was pretty much conquered except for Europe. Within 50 years, it was all like Islam. Incredible energy that he brought in an age when the energy is so low, the tamas, the darkness, that he brought all this energy to stimulate people. It brought a lot of war and violence, but the point is, when you're kind of like this, don't want to do anything in the Dark Age, when you're forced to fight for your life, you become, you're lifting yourself up from that, and like Swami Vivekananda once said, it's better to even be a little bit bad and have some energy than to be do absolutely nothing. That's a rajas. He brought in the rajasic energy, and because it's in a dark age, it had a lot of negative repercussions. But at the same time, he also brought the Sufis. Actually that's from the Eastern Empire, but he also brought the number 0 from India and brought the compass from China. And I think they had, the University of Cairo had 12,000 students, and they used the globe to teach geography. That's pretty amazing. There's a lot of energy there. And there's actually Genghis Khan, the guy after Genghis Khan that conquered everything. He destroyed Cairo, and I think Islam never recovered from that completely. became, it wasn't the leading civilization anymore. Then the knowledge of the calendar based on precession that's known to all ancient civilizations was completely lost. The bishops were shocked when their Easter celebration kept getting later into the summer because they didn't know how to keep the calendar properly. If they had gone to Stonehenge and aligned to the vernal autumnal equinox, they would have known what to do. And yes, in Persia, Byzantine Christians translate Plato, Aristotle, kind of mentioned that already. And scholasticism elevates logic to paramount status. Canon law based on Roman law, rules equals Kali Yuga, the dark age, everything is rules, because you have to learn how to behave, because you have no inner compass, so to say. And then the Canterbury Tales come along with Chaucer making fun of scholars looking to Aristotle about how many teeth does a horse have, and one of the stable boys is hearing them talking about this and tells them, why don't you just go out to the horse and count the teeth? But they say, oh, that's ridiculous. You need to go with the ancients, And so he's making fun of that because times were changing. The energy of, starting to come in, we're getting into a slightly higher age. And what's interesting is the great chain of being. I don't know if you've heard of that, but that's in the Middle Ages. That was the way everything was set by God, the great chain of being. If you're a nobleman, you'll always be a nobleman. If you're a serf, you're a serf. You can't change that. If you try to change your status, you're questioning God's plan, so to say. So the great chain of being was pretty strong at that time. But then comes the Iron Age transition, 1598 to 1698. And this is when the scholars say this is the start of the modern period. Renaissance, Reformation are looming, but also changes in the Middle East, Africa, key changes in Russia, Eastern Europe, between America and the rest of the world. So you have 6 major events happening here. And this is the time when the first insurance companies come along. And this idea of insurance company to protect you from acts of God, so to say, the idea is you can change the things that God has planned by, taking out insurance. This is kind of unheard of before. And when you have this concept of the great chain of being, and this is also when things happen, like you start to have ideas of statistics. That was totally alien to the idea of mathematics in the Dark Age. And also, in the Dark Age, you can have wonderful engineering, incredible architecture, but you don't have electricity. That's something that happens later. And so, you have the Renaissance humanism, you have the rise of centrally governed nation states, you have discovery of the new world, this openness. This is all starting to happen all of a sudden in this transition period. And then the invention of the printing press by Gutenberg, and if I remember right, let's see. Yeah, there's within 50 years, some 6,000 works have been printed. Like within 50 years after the printing press was invented, and where do you get the paper? Where do you get the infrastructure to get all that set up? The things were happening very fast. You can imagine the energy there, and then the amount of people. Like within 50 years, 50% of Europe. Oh no, wait, that was. Got ahead of myself here. Literacy was only 5% in 1500, and then by 1600 it was 20%. That's really a lot of energy there. But then comes the Reformation. Luther was excommunicated in 1521, and so within 50 years, 50% of Europe was Protestant. Can you imagine that within 50 years? when things were like just the Catholic Church, everything was going just great, and then all of a sudden, boom, all these things are happening simultaneously. It's just, mind-boggling. And then the wars of religion start by 1523. And you have the 30 Years' War. Like 1/3 of the population was wiped out in many countries. And Spain, which was one of the strongholds of Catholicism, their whole treasury went bankrupt from all the money they spent to try to convert people back to the Catholic Church. All the wars of religion, bankrupted these nations, and Spain never quite recovered as a leading nation after that. And then also what's interesting is that in all the money coming from the New World, all the gold and silver, you wonder, where did all that go? It actually went to China, which kind of blew my mind when I found that out. And because when Europe was trading with China at that time already, but China had nothing. They had like silk. They had all these wonderful things that we traded, but there was nothing that they wanted from us. So we gave them our gold and silver. So it's like China already had, the same idea of the trade deficit that we're suffering, I mean, it goes way back to that already. I just found that out just a few years ago. I thought that was pretty interesting. So now starts a New World exploration, all that energy. 1519 already, the circumnavigation of the globe by Magellan. After 1492 of discovering the New World, that didn't take very long. Then you have the British East India Company, Virginia Company, Dutch East India Company, French East India Company. They all had their own armies. Before that, only a king was allowed to have an army. They didn't allow the average people to have this, and so things are changing drastically. You can see that this follows the Yuga so precisely. It's just mind-boggling that here's just the transition from Kali to out of the Kali Yuga. Now comes the 200-year transition into Dvapara Yuga from 1700 to 1900. So here we go. So now this is the age of science and outer exploration, according to the ancient India keys to the Yugas. And the Raja's passion, a lot of energy, with a lot of tamas, a lot of darkness. But so you're stirring up a lot of mud, and the Vaishyas merged, the age of merchants, agriculture, business. And then you start very slowly with the pranayama, understanding of the life force. That takes time. And the conquest of space. As I mentioned, the conquest of space in terms of distance, conquering distance. So you have like telegraph, telephone, television. With television already, you need quantum mechanics and some really deep stuff to make that happen. And then from there, going to the planets. So it's 200-year transition. We have the French Enlightenment, the end of slavery. So actually, what was happening is that, trying to remember here, that the serfs in Russia, like 20 million or something like that, were freed in like 1851, and then Lincoln abolished slavery and in the New World, and then the British East India and the French all abolished slavery around that time, and then China didn't abolish slavery until 1915. They were a little bit late, but anyway, all these things are happening right during this time, which is pretty amazing. Then the first establishment of international mail, also International Red Cross, World Courts, World Sports, beginning of a global economy. And Kali Yuga concepts are inconsistent with our new age, like Marxism, based on atheistic materialism. Those kind of things don't quite work, and they're disappearing gradually. Like what was really incredible is that the Soviet Union just disappeared almost overnight. We didn't expect that. We were expecting world wars or something before they'd give up. But you had good people like Gorbachev, coming in, things like that. I mean, there's something going on that's, making this world better, even though we see a lot of bad things. But we haven't used the atomic bomb again since Second World War. That's an incredible achievement right there. As I said, you don't want to give a nuclear submarine to a Viking, because, when you have more and more power, you have a lot more responsibility. And when the age ascends, there's something that happens spiritually, morally, along with the understanding of technology. The things go together. And so, even though some of it's almost, not quite making it, and then you have the bad people using the new technology, and, so it's pretty close, so you've got some special beings watching over us, to kind of get through all this, and we're still right, in the middle of it, and it's pretty iffy, But the point is that no matter what happens, we are in an upward cycle, and even if we go through tough times, we're going to make it, And here we have, this new type of knowledge, acupuncture. This is the, transition and going into the proper Bronze Age. We have deeper aspects of martial arts. We're back with archaeology. Nebuchadnezzar and Nabonidus in the last emperors in Babylonia in the downgoing Dwapara Yuga when it ended. They preserved the ancient things. They were archaeologists. And then it all disappeared. Now we're back into archaeology, and we're actually in stage 3 of archaeology, which has become very scientific. Not the grave robbers of the 1700s, So modern technology is only one part of man's advancement in this ascending cycle. We're overemphasizing right now, but it's necessary. This is the stage we have to go through, and this technology will gradually translate into an inner technology of the soul. So, there's the things happening with quantum mechanics is really pretty important. The idea is that when we look at quantum mechanics, all the tests we've done with it show that consciousness is primary. If there's no observer, all the particles are in limbo. They're just kind of, they're not fully there. It's only when the observation takes place that things become what they are. And that's been so proven so many times with quantum mechanics that this biocentrism, Robert Landry and Bob Berman, two scientists, one astronomer, one a biogeneticist or so, they figured out, they wrote the book and said, look, let's be realistic, let's recognize this, because we've proven it over and over. So the idea isn't that the universe was created in a big bang and eventually galaxies formed and planets, and eventually a man came around through by chance. Rather, first there's consciousness, and that created the universe, and all these things happen. Consciousness is primary. you know, and we have to start to recognize that, and that's what's going to happen in this age. And Energy Anatomy by Carolyn Mace, your biography becomes your biology. Because the way you live your life is how your body is going to turn out. You know, you can't fake that. You know, if you don't live right and if you don't eat right, you're going to have problems, kind of, you know. And we all struggle with these things. But the idea is, we no longer take an aspirin to cure a problem. We have to look at it from an energy point of view, you know, of what's causing this problem. And we take responsibility for our life. Whereas before, you let the doctor do everything, and or you let the priest handle your spiritual life. But now, we want our own experience of God. We take charge of who we are. And that's this new age that we're in. And let's see. I should read just a little bit of this. What happens, instead of the 100% energy coming below your waist to make healthy cells, we begin to understand that our trauma blockages keep much of our energy from reaching the organs of our bodies, so that our kidneys, for instance, are only receiving 20% of the energy that they need, and no operation is going to fix that, since the problem is with our energy flow that is tied up with past memories. We are no longer fully present in the moment, since we have invested our energy in past emotions. We realize that we can no longer take an aspirin to cure a problem. We have to look at it from an energy point of view. That's the new age. So, and she talks about the first chakra. She's not aware of the yugas, you know, but she talks about the first chakra being tribal consciousness, law, justice, law and order. Just what we were talking about, the dark age. That's where you are in body consciousness, at that bottom chakra. And you expect society to take care of you. Like communism expects, the people expect the country to take care of you, you know. Socialism belongs to the first chakra. Right now with the new age, companies are no longer taking care of their own. The tribal consciousness is changing. You need to handle things yourself. If you're plugged into the beliefs of society, then you can only heal at the rate of society. It also determines at which rate guidance comes to you. If you want to go faster than society to heal cancer, you have to go within. You know, that's when, you know, you have miracles, you know, where things change. So, one of the things coming, molecular nanotechnology, I'll skip that. Now, there's been one of the breakthroughs, I didn't realize that would change like that. Well, anyway, the idea is, like, I'm talking about sanitation is a big sign of things changing, and now for the first time, the Bill Gates Foundation, this one guy who's a physicist with one of the national labs, came up with an idea of where you no longer need the whole infrastructure of waste and toilets and plumbing systems and piping. All this stuff will go away. What they do is they instantly flash burn the human waste and also all the other waste that you have at home. All goes in the toilet and is just burned. And the burning process, the energy of that is absorbed for electricity to power your home. And so, you know, now finally going to the bathroom will generate energy. And he says that we have the technology to do it, and they're developing it. And so this whole idea of being in cities where you have all this plumbing and everything will eventually go away in this higher age. Same with solar power. You don't have to live in cities anymore. You can just live anywhere. You know, that's what we're going to see in the future. And one of the things mentioned before is one of the people in nanotechnology talked about respirocytes, and I was part of sharing a conference on nanotechnology at Oak Ridge National Lab, and I had this person speaking, and it was pretty remarkable. And so the idea is you put these respirocytes into your blood. 10% of your blood corpuscles are replaced by these respirocytes that absorb oxygen and CO2 230 times more than the human blood. And the medulla oblongata checks every breath what your oxygen level is. So if your oxygen level is fine, you don't need to breathe. So the idea is, say you have a heart attack and your heart stops, you've got 4 hours before you need, you're in trouble, because this stuff will provide you with all the oxygen for 4 hours. And so you can call the hospital and say, hey, my heart stopped. Stop at the store for something first, and then I'll come over and just have everything ready. Okay, so you go. Or you go scuba diving. You don't need gear anymore. You can hold your breath for 4 hours, and because you're not breathing down like 100, 200 feet below the surface of the ocean, you're not building any nitrogen buildup, for the bends, because you took your breath already up to normal level, so you can go and for 4 hours underwater and come back up. And the only thing that's really interesting is, to me, this kind of mechanistic approach to these new things can be misleading, because I remember Dr. Lewis, the second president of SRF, vice president, he had a vision that actually Ananda had given him, and he saw all his blood inside his body, all this light and prana, all this energy flow, and you think there's a lot more to blood than just physical something like that. And so, what if we replace 10% of our blood with this? There might be something missing. But as we go higher in the age, we're going to have other things that'll work, like some of the ionic water, like Kangen water, that's actually more electrons and energy in there. So that's already kind of getting to the idea of, of the energy that age that we're in. And here, this is really interesting. This also is Josh Hall, the one that spoke at the Nano conference. Talks about programmable matter. And now this sounds pretty weird, but it's actually some of the companies in the Department of Defense is already working on this. Of course, it's like the age we're in. But the thing is, imagine like pixels on a TV screen, and you don't see the pixels because they're too small. Well, imagine them as voxels, volumetric pixels. And you have trillions of them, say, all over your floor, and they all hold on to each other. If they hold on real soft, then it feels like a gushy carpet. If they hold on real tight, then it's like a hardwood floor. But now they reform into your bed, they reform into your blankets, they reform, you change your clothes into your pajamas, all like with the program that you run. And then in the morning when you get up, you invoke a computer program to whatever you liked on the internet, maybe to change the bed into a nice couch or tables and chairs, and change your clothes into like whatever you want to wear for the day. Then your friend calls you from Germany, and you want to converse in his room, so your whole room, these are called foglets. The foglets reform themselves to be the exact replica of his room, and they form him as well. So you walk up and shake his hand, and it feels like his hand, and you can talk to him. And the thing is not virtual reality. You're not wearing 3D glasses. I mean, the table is really a table. All these things are real. And now, you imagine if this happens in our society, in our culture, you know, we have all these foglets and everything's made of it. A robber wants to come and rob your house. What's he going to rob? It's all foglets. It just changes into whatever you want, so there's no sense in taking anything. You know, he would want some program, but not this, you know. So robbery wouldn't make any sense anymore. And then as you go deeper into this age, you'll find that eventually we'll be controlling the actual atoms to form, to program whatever we want. And then we go another step in the higher ages, and then we're materializing a palace in the Himalayas like Babaji, right? Because it's the same idea of having the control over the atoms. So we're starting that at this point, you know. It's already happening in this Vapara Yuga. And so the greater the power of technology, the greater the responsibility. So I've kind of covered that already. Oh boy, I'm running out of time, but this is kind of interesting stuff. Well, just briefly, this programmable matter goes deeper into our DNA, because DNA is a program that builds our entire body from the sperm and ovum, you know, and knows how to do all that. Well, that's only like 5% or so of the DNA is the codable DNA. The non-coded DNA, which some people had called junk DNA, we don't know what it does. And so if you're an advanced, like in the higher ages, and you don't want to lose your technology, you could program all that into that non-coded DNA. And what's interesting about that is there's Zipf's law. And Zipf's law is a linguist who figured out that all human languages, no matter what, Navajo or Chinese or whatever, there's this ranking of words in order of frequency that plots a straight line with a slope of -1 for every human language. And so no matter what language you pick, you can tell it's a human language by applying this law. And it's actually pretty simple, but I don't want to spend the time on it. But what happens is that when they applied the Zipf's law to the 5% or so of the coded DNA, it doesn't work. But when you apply Zipf's law to the 5% or so of the non-coded DNA, it fits perfectly. It's a human language. Whoa, you know, it kind of makes you wonder. So maybe they did program that. And so if you did program it, like say you're stranded on a planet without a spaceship, and you go up to a lake and you sweat out the DNA coding that's hidden in the DNA for a spaceship, and then gradually in the water the stuff builds everything just like it builds a human body. It'll build your spaceship. Maybe it'll take a month or so, but then, you know, ready to go. Or whatever else you need, whatever else they programmed into it. I don't know, but it's just one of those thoughts, you know.
Can you design your own wife?
Yeah. Now, the example of Kriya Yoga, see, like, we're in an age where belief is no longer enough. We want the experience of God. And so, right now, like the energization exercises, I think Paramahansa gave those to us to adjust our energy to this higher age. And because the whole idea is we want to be back in cosmic maintenance, you know, we want to be back where we live in this energy rather than being trapped in the body. We don't, no longer materialistic. Energization exercises awaken that energy within us. And there's 1 year when I practiced them 3-4 times a day, and it got to the point where even if I didn't get any sleep, I couldn't be tired because energy can't be tired because I was in the energy state. So that's really this next state that we want to be in, this state of energy. And so we've been given these techniques, and so Kriya Yoga reflects this, you know, the next age of spiritual inner development. of learning. We're learning what's common to the next age, this of withdrawing the sense from outer objects and going within. And at the same time, it's made to speed up the evolution of our soul so that we can transcend the yugas. The whole idea, whatever is outside is within us, and so this outer development going through the constellations, you know, year after year, you know, developing our consciousness. Well, we can do the same thing within with the Kriya current inside and go much faster. So I already mentioned that there. Now we come into the Silver Age. This is the age of yogic powers, yogic technique. You know, like right now, like when people are doing deep research, like the Rand Corporation, well, the same kind of thing in the Silver Age will be yogis meditating, developing inner type of technology, inner powers that we think of as magic. But for them, this is the new technology because it's the power of the mind. You know, like to give you an example, John von Neumann, the famous mathematician who we depend on his computer. He just really developed the earliest computer back in the 1940s and so, and also one of the incredible. He was a super genius. A lot of stories I could tell you about him, but one of the things is that people came to him and they asked him, is it possible to build a computer of such complexity to solve this problem that we have? You know, because it was incredibly complex. And John von Neumann said, okay, let me think about that. And he kind of closed his eyes and he was gone for like 15, 20 minutes. And they were kind of wondering what's going on. Pretty soon he kind of came back to normal consciousness and they asked him, well, you know, is it possible then that you could build a computer of that complexity to solve this problem? And he says, oh, we don't have to build it. I've solved the problem already. And he had. And this guy was unbelievable, you know. And the point is that, okay, we're building all these complex computers to solve these problems, but when we get to the Silver Age, we won't need computers because we have all that power and much more inside of us. Because the mind is very limited. It can't handle these, you know, it can only handle so many things. And also like in that age, entertainment will be very different. Right now, in a lot of things on TV, you know, it's like The Mentalist, pretty good show, you know, deals with a murder. It's always a murder at the beginning, and then who did it, you know, like solve it. Those kind of things aren't, you know, won't be around anymore because it's all negative stuff. You know, that kind of thing, we wouldn't even comprehend the entertainment that's coming in that age. And also in this age, we have some of the texts from the higher ages in India still there. And when the hippies saw these texts in the 60s, you know, they thought, oh, gee, you know, it says, oh, you don't have to meditate, you don't have to make any effort because you're already there, you know. Well, that's because that was written in that age when these people already were able to, you know, withdraw their mind instantly into higher consciousness. And so the problem is in this ascending Silver Age, what happens is that everybody's focused on techniques, and the prophet that comes to bring the new religion for that age, to bring them into the golden age, will show them how to actually go deeper and just be in God rather than focusing on all these powers, right? So, and then as we enter into the golden age, I mentioned here that this is like Indian philosophy, Purvamimamsa Vedanta, the oneness of God, sattva, peace, enlightenment, with some rajas, some energy. And everyone is basically like a Brahmin, and meditation, samadhi, superconscious experience, understanding of the Om vibration. It's a very high age. And now, the thing is, once you're in this age, when you go to the transition to the next level, there is no higher age, right? But there's still a 400-year transition. Where's that going? It goes to the next 3 stages that Sri Yukteswara talks about: Jano Loka, Tapa Loka, and Satya Loka, which is beyond the 4 ages. And I'll mention that, but I wanted to mention briefly here, this is kind of amazing. The Yoga Vasishta is one of the yogic scriptures in India, and in there it actually talks about these people who are actually free souls, they're liberated souls, and they're actually living in numerous bodies on different planets in different time zones simultaneously, and that just blows our minds. But to them, this is natural. You know, that's in the golden age. They're in that level where, and in the autobiography of a yogi and the law of miracles, Ananda says, I haven't mentioned certain miracles because I'd have to write volumes to explain it. Well, this is kind of what he was talking about, that there are these beings in the golden age, in the highest ages, that they literally live in numerous bodies simultaneously on different planets, in different time zones, you know, which to us is completely incomprehensible. They can live simultaneously in different time zones because they've overcome time. They've conquered time in the Silver Age. And here, this is a story of the sage from outer space, from the Yoga Vasishta. I wanted to read that to you. Because you already, you know, kind of understand these things used to be thought of as fables. Now you understand that in these higher ages, these things are, you know, this is natural to them. And we think of this as, you know, crazy. But here, I re-entered my cottage, or hermitage, in outer space. I looked for my physical body. It was not there. But I found an aged sage sitting in that hermitage. He was in deep meditation. He was seated in the lotus posture. His face was radiant and beautiful on account of the peace and bliss that filled him. His lotus-like hands had been placed in front of his navel, and they shone with an extraordinary brilliance. Surely this is a great and perfected sage. Like me, he must have arrived here seeking total seclusion. Since he thought seclusion, he must have seen this hermitage in space. Perhaps he expected me to return, and seeing that I had not returned for a long time, he must have thrown that body, his body, out and himself occupied the hermitage. Let me return to my own realm. When I thus reflected, and when my desire to stay in that hermitage ceased, that hermitage disappeared, and with it even that sage disappeared. When one's thoughts cease, that which those thoughts brought into being also ceased. When my wish for the hermitage ceased, it disappeared. Like a spacecraft, that hermitage fell, the sage fell, and I too descended along with him onto the earth plane. The sage landed in the same state and posture in which he was in that hermitage. This was because through the union of prana apana, he had overcome the force of gravity. He did not even wake up from his meditation. In order to bring him back to normal body consciousness, I assumed the form of a big cloud which rained and thundered. Then he regained body consciousness. I inquired of him, "Where are you, O sage? What are you doing? Who are you? Though you fell from such height, you're oblivious of it. How is that?" After contemplating the past for a few moments, the sage said, "I have now recognized you, O Holy One. I salute you. Kindly pardon me for having saluted you, or not having saluted you earlier. It is indeed the nature of sages to be forgiving. O sage, I have wandered in the realms of the gods for a considerable time. I'm tired of this delusion. When all this is pure consciousness, what is it that we call pleasure? Hence I reside in space, free from mental distractions and attraction. So it's kind of interesting how they can just play. I mean, everything is materialized with their very thoughts. You know, they're living in this place, and this ceases to exist, and they come down here. And, you know, it's a whole different world that that we don't really understand. I'm trying to give you a little feel of it. You know.
Is this not a place of like what we would call dreams?
No, in this case,
dream?
it's very real. It's like I think he's going in the astral or in the causal, and then going down to the physical plane, and he can do that at will, you know. But again, we don't fully comprehend that. So there's this 400-year transition. You can't go to a higher age. Where does it go? And so the next 400-year transition starts the 12,000-year downward cycle. So this is a special time for souls to escape the Yuga cycle and reach Jnana-loka, the sphere of the sons of God. And so here, this is the, and Sri Pestra basically says, when the following states of consciousness become the general state of human beings naturally in any solar system, then the whole of that system is said to be in that yuga, or in that sphere, I should say. So the bottom is the Bhuloka. This is Kali Yuga consciousness, which is in the bottom, the coccyx region, the sphere of gross matter. And Sri Tesra said this is always visible to everybody. But then when you go to the next level, Bhuvarloka, I believe that's Vapara Yuga, at the sacral center, the sphere of fine matters, electric attributes. Remember, this is where we discover electricity and all that. That's the age we're in. Man becomes Bija, twice born again in spirit, diverging in the Om. And so, the bottom age is you're not twice born in the script. I mean, the Hindu scriptures. The top 3 ages where you're twice born, and that's the idea that you become part of like spiritual consciousness, and we're trying to achieve that. And so when most of us reach this level in this Vapara Yuga, then this whole solar system evidently will be in Bhuvarloka. And then you come to the next level, Svarloka, which is the silver age, the lumber center, the sphere of magnetic poles, auras, electricity. Man is Vipra, nearly perfect, remaining immersed in the holy stream. Then Maharloka is the Satya Yuga, at the dorsal center, the sphere of magnets. Man comprehends the spiritual light, Brahman. This is the door between the material and the spiritual creation, leads to the spheres of light beyond the Yuga cycle. So this is the door, Dasamadvara, where the astral samadhi, once, like when in the golden age, when a savior comes for that age, he will try to, people are so happy in astral samadhi that they don't want to make any effort. And he shows them the way to go beyond. And that's why I think, those of you who know about the fourth Kriya, that is the technique that takes you from here up to the rest of the way. So Yogananda has already given us the method that takes us from the golden age upward to the final stages. And so then we go, once we transcend the Yuga cycle, we go to Jnana-loka, beyond the Yugas, in the cervical, then the sphere of the sons of God, then Tapa-loka, at the Christ center, and then finally Satya-loka, beyond the Yugas, the sphere of God, eternal. So this is kind of new here, and I need to verify this further, so I won't go into that. Then in the descending golden age, this is when someone, a sage comes along that tries to hold the people at the top of that age, if possible. And so, there again, the understanding of the Vedas is, and the thing is, like, Vyasa and his friend wrote that book on the Yugas. He's the one, they kind of figured out that the Vedas really came from the Silver Age, because the Golden Age, they didn't need the Yugas because they had direct Shruti, or direct insight into God, whereas in the Silver Age you start to lose it, and so they wrote the Vedas that you can still access that type of consciousness. And so at the end of the Ice Age, 10,000 BC, there was 400-foot rise of sea level with earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. 10 million square miles of Europe, Asia swallowed up, countless myths of a flood. Catastrophes necessary to prevent lower consciousness from misusing the power of the higher age. So that's like the age, like the end of Atlantis and all these things happening. And so how do you rebuild what you had when the infrastructure was destroyed? You know. So then we enter the Treta Yuga. Just that last age, you know, that we cover here. And what happens is, we already know that, again, this is the age of magic. Of course, there's a little bit more technology, whereas you don't need technology at all in the Golden Age. You make whatever you need. But here you start to have little bits of crutches, you know, of things. And this is during the descending Silver Age. Once you start to come out of that age, that's when you have the myth of the Tower of Babel, the descent into language. Like all writing, that's at the end of the last Silver Age. All writing begins just before 3000 BC. What's interesting there is that this idea of telepathy being in the two higher stages, that everyone, when there was still language as such, like a perfect intonation of things, the power of words, but what was lost, I mean, what was this idea of different languages came after the end of the Silver Age, because people had lost that telepathic communion between each other. And when you lose that, you have misunderstandings. That's when war begins. And there's the book, The Fall, where the guy did all the studies of archaeology and all over the world. He found out that all war really didn't begin until 3000 BC. Before then, there was no record of war as we know it. And that's because when people are open to each other telepathically, you understand each other perfectly. And once you start to lose that, then you start to have problems, and that's when wars begin. And I had an experience like this of telepathy. I was at Occidental College in the late 60s. I was meditating a lot, and I was attending a talk by Shibayama Roshi, which was a Zen master from Japan. And he would talk, like people would ask a question, and a woman translator would translate the question to the Roshi, to the Zen master, and then he would answer in Japanese, and she would then translate. Well, I asked him a question, and she translated to him, and then he looked me straight in the eye and gave his answer in Japanese, and the amazing thing was that I completely understood him. It was like suddenly there was complete telepathic rapport. I don't understand a single word of Japanese, but he transmitted his answer to me completely. And when the woman started to translate, I don't need to listen to this because he already answered me. And that was just a real eye-opener to me, and I think he must have been pretty deep to be able to do that. And I never forgot that. That's pretty amazing. So you get a sense, of what telepathy is like. And That way, there's no misunderstandings. You really understand the other person. You know? And then at that time, you know, you have these like Baalbek in Lebanon, 1,000 ton to 1,400 ton. That's almost 3 million pound blocks that were placed for their buildings. We can't move that kind of stuff now. You know, it's like, but probably because after those catastrophes, maybe they just moved things around what they needed. So the descending Silver Age, the beginnings of violence at the end of the age, The Fall by Steve Taylor. These beings are living on fruit and light and transitioning to agriculture. That some grains, the eventual use of alcohol, you know, that really brings things down there in the Bronze Age. But you know how people even now are starting to be able to, like Arnold Ehret with the Nicholas diet system and things, how some of these people are actually living by the sunlight, like Yuga Ananda in the lessons teaches you how to go by, you know, sunlight for energy and things, and there are people who are actually doing that and living off the sunlight. And we're starting to get back to that. So the idea of agriculture is really a lower state, and they, you know, scientists are always saying, well, that's, you know, we're advancing with humanity now that we have agriculture. But then these paleoanthropologists who study skeletons, they say that they can tell instantly a skeleton from a hunter-gatherer society and one from the agricultural society, because the hunter-gatherer one has perfect bone structure, perfect teeth, and the one from the agricultural society's got all kinds of problems. So it's definitely a lower state. Yes.
So Boris, I just wanted to mention I also read The Fall by Steve Taylor.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to point out that one of the things he emphasized was the transition from a matriarchal equality society to a patriarchal.
Right.
And so that has a lot to do with, you know, the wars and
Wars, yeah.
Yeah, it did, yeah,
being more
yeah.
aggressive. And,
Right, yeah. So, well, and also, you know, one thing I forgot to mention in all this is like in the Dark Ages, 80 to 90% of the people worked the fields, so that the 10% or so people could live in cities. Now what's happened? Look at what's happened now. I think only 2% people work the fields, you know, and the rest of us do things that people could never even imagine in the Dark Age. The kind of jobs we have, you know, I mean, there would be like someone from 200 or 100 years ago, you know, would be just amazed, you know.
But technology played a big role in that there, huh?
And what?
Technology played a big role in that, in agriculture.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, interesting, like Indus Valley civilization, had 70 cities, some of which housed as many as 50,000 inhabitants in the descending Silver Age. No weapons found. I forgot to mention Knossos, the palace there. There are also no weapons, no walls, because you don't need walls to protect the city like you do in the Dark Age, because you have all these other capabilities, like in the Mahabharata, and actually the Yoga Vasishtha also mentions like missiles that with multiple warheads and things, and also things having to do with radiation exposure from bombs and things, you know. So these things were happening, and like they still had flying machines able to travel. And in the Ramayana epic, the end of the Treta Yuga, I want to read this real quick to you. It's real short, but it's to give you an idea. This idea of weapons that are completely different from our time. Here's this. Rama said, "But you have already blessed us. What gift could be greater than that?" And Vishvamitra, his guru, replied, "For two young kshatriyas, or warriors, on the threshold of life, the gift of devastras, they will help you someday against enemies far greater than Tataka, who they just defeated. These are weapons only the restrained should have, and you, Rama, are born so. Now I am sure of who you are. No one else could have killed Tataka. Now come sit here with me. When Rama sat facing the east, Vishwamitra taught him the mantras to summon the occult weapons. The rishi himself had the astras from Shiva long ago, when he was still a king and had no need of them. When Rama spoke the secret mantras, the lords of the astras appeared before him. They were neither in this world nor yet in the next. They stood between realms, their bodies of pristine light. The eyes of some were turquoise flames. Others had locks of green tongues of fire. Rama said to them, "Dwell in my mind until I have need of you." They melted into him, and he glowed more than ever. Vishwamitra said to Rama, "To teach what you have learned is to learn it twice over. Even if your brother had none of the greatness he bears so humbly, he would deserve to have the astras just for his love of you. Devotion like his is not of this world. Rama, share what I have taught you with Lakshmana." Rama taught his brother the mantras. Then the gods of the weapons appeared before Lakshmana as well. He too had them enter his spirit in splendid forms. So here, this is a whole different type of weapon system that, we can relate to, right? It's like, these are inner powers that are unbelievably great that we don't comprehend. And then this is the age of the Brahmanas, Aranyakas, the technology of the Treta Yuga. And so the Aranyakas are called the forest books. And my Sanskrit teacher had told me that the reason they were called Aranyakas, or forest books, because they could only be taught out in the forest away from the city, because they were so powerful that if you pronounced things wrong, it could destroy an entire city. And so, could anyone, in the Dark Age, understand a present-day book on plasma physics? It would just be, they wouldn't know what to do with it. Same way here, if I look like the Shatapatra Brahmana, read that, it'll put you to sleep. But it's all this kind of technology of this higher age that we don't understand anymore. I wanted to mention, I've got that coming next. But anyway, like tolerance in the Egyptian pyramids versus our concrete and cement skyscrapers, they were so accurate. The Egyptian pyramid tolerance of 10,000ths of an inch, in terms of the size of the blocks. We don't have that kind of tolerance today. And then our, Indiana, the limestone quarries for our buildings tolerance are 1/4 of an inch. This is 10,000ths of an inch, And there's a lot more of that. I won't go into that. Then other thing in the Silver Age is conquest of time. And so they have these time travel, remnants and tales of fairy circles or ring portals. They talk about people going into them and coming out like 100 years later or something, and looking for their relatives, and they've long since passed. These stories still happen because they use these ring portals evidently using the geomagnetic forces of the earth, to do the work, and had it all arranged. And so we don't understand this anymore. We need to get to that age to comprehend it. And but Moses and Aaron, remember the magic rods and the power words and all that? They were capable of this. And Moses was still, he was taught by the priests there when he grew up in Pharaoh's court. He learned all this stuff. And Shach-Am-Ang, the one priest, was able to part the waters to get a bracelet from one of the princesses of the Pharaoh. She had lost it in the water, and so he he parted the water and took it out. And and there's an Egyptian court case, 1500 BC, in times of Ramses III, murdered by a woman in harem and appeared as material witness by being channeled in spiritual form. This form of evidence was accepted at that time, that they were still able to do some of these things. And just want to give you an idea of the words of power. I had started that story realizing this is the right time to tell it, about seeing one of the monks when I was at Occidental College, and I was being disturbed by all the students around me. I wanted to keep my own vibration. So I asked him, what should I do? And he said, oh, don't you know about Om Tat Sat, the three highest vibrations in and beyond the universe? You know, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, basically. But the Om vibration in the universe, Tat is the Christ intelligence guiding that Om vibration, which is coming out of the ultimate Sat of God beyond creation. And so when you intone those three words, you know, that's the most powerful words you can intone that create a cone of protection all around you. And he told me that he had been at the beach once and he was just lying down, and some people came with a ghetto blaster and blasting all this like heavy metal music. So he started to mentally chant Om Tat Sat, and within 5 minutes or so, those people had gone because it hurt them, you know, the high vibration. But he was surrounded by children and dogs because they love that vibration. And so then I was in his office at Mount Washington, and he started to intone the Om Tat Sat, Om Tat Sat. And when he kept doing it, and the energy in the room kept building and building and building. All of a sudden, I thought the energy in the room was so intense that if he did it one more time, the entire room would literally explode. It was that powerful. Something I can never forget. And at that point, he stopped because he knew that was the limit. You know, but he wanted to teach me a lesson, and that's what I learned about. So I have my own experience of words of power. You know, that's what's possible, but it has to come from the vibration through the spiritual eye. The words have to be intoned in just that way. That's why the Vedas were never written down, because it was the method of intonation. You had to have the spiritual power behind it. Same with Vedic chanting. The spiritual power inside to bring that to life. You know, it's not just physical words. You know, so that was really important. So in Satya Yuga, the fight, the battle duality was between Deva Loka and Asura Loka, two different worlds. In the Silver Age, the fight was between Rama and Ravana and the Ramayana, rulers from different countries on the same world. Then in Dwapara Yuga, the Bronze Age, the fight was between the Pandavas and the Kauravas in the Mahabharata, good and evil within the same family. But then in Kali Yuga, the fight is inside of us, our inner battle to become twice born or born again in spirit, to surrender to God and truly enter the next age of Dwapara Yuga. So, you know, in the Golden Age, two different worlds. Silver Age, you have the battle between different countries, and then in the Dwapara Yuga that we're now entering, it's within the family still, the evil. Because once we overcome this and live in spiritual consciousness, the evil has gone out of us, you know. But in the Dark Age, it's within us, you know, and we're trying to get out of that. So now we've come from words back to cosmic maintenance, from mental prayer to meditation and stillness. And one of the examples I use is like prayer for food is nice because we're intoning a prayer, so the intention is nice. But what if you did cosmic maintenance? What if you go to the Dwapara Yuga and do it where what you do is you put your hand over the food and you feel the prana energy coming from your hand intermingling with the energy from the food. It's not not putting energy into the food, you're blending between your hand and your food. You feel this vibration. And somebody had taught me how to do that. And it only takes like 30 seconds or so. You start to feel this energy and you feel this blending. And once it's blended, this food has become usable for your body. That's the real prayer, right? That's Vapara Yuga type of prayer for food, I would think. You know, and then my friend could see auras, and she, just when I felt that was blended, she said, "Okay, you're done." You know, she could see it blending. You know, so that's really important. This kind of new way of interacting with the world, of you know, with our energy. And then finally, I'm almost done. There's a little, I don't know how this came so small. I just wanted to mention some new idea I had recently. You know how the UFOs have been watching us, like from outer space, and like even in the Dark Ages, they would have pictures of like the Virgin Mary and things. In the back, you'd see a disc of a flying saucer. You know, they have these things recorded, and so I thought, well, you know, if Sirius is our binary planet, star. And it's probably that Sirius has a planet, inhabited planet like us, but they're on the opposite of this, because as they're coming further away from the Pleiades, beautiful vibrations, and we're coming closer, we're always opposite. So at one point, if we're both about the same and we're both in the like Triyada Vapara Yuga in a higher age, we both have space travel, and we're both communicating and interchanging between us. But when one side is going down, the other is going up, then the down-going side, those families probably want their offspring to be on the other side, you know, on the other planet. And then gradually things change where, you know, we're so low down here and they're so high up here, then we lose touch because they don't want anything to do with us anymore and that low vibration, and we would be too violent. And so now that things are kind of changing back, they're like in Treta Yuga, we're in ascending Vapara Yuga. At some point we're going to be back in touch, and you know, these are our brothers. I think, you know, we're all related, and it's just a thought I have, but kind of makes sense out of it, and just, you know. So I'm almost done. What is the difference of sin in the Dark Age as opposed to the higher ages? I had asked Brother Dharmananda one time, and he said, well, for us monks, sin is to think of ourselves as a physical body. Wow, you know, that's pretty deep. That's exactly what we're talking about here. This twice born coming out of Kali Yuga, body consciousness of, you know, to think of ourselves always as the soul, as the energy, you know. There are deeper states too, but that's the first way, you know, to be aware of ourselves as the energy. When we meditate, when we practice Tai Chi or practice energization exercises, we feel that energy within us, and that's the presence of God. You know, and we surrender to that, and we surrender to the Om vibration, and that brings us to that higher level. So, Yogananda said, many souls who were created at dawn of this creation are still roaming this universe, according, you know, to Yogananda in the Wine of the Mystic. Learn it now or in 1,000 incarnations. How much and how long do we want to suffer? We must make that effort to transcend the cycles of the ages and find our eternal freedom in God. And here from The Tempest by William Shakespeare. Our revels are not ended. These our actors are melted into air, into thin air. And like the basest fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, gorgeous palaces, the solemn temples shall dissolve. And like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. We are stuff as dreams are made on, and our little lives are rounded in a sleep. So, and that's, we are down there, so. And picture of Sri Yukteswar. And just want to make you aware of Cosmic Influence podcast. If you load a podcast app on your phone or iPad or whatever, then you can load the Cosmic Influence podcast from iTunes. And there's probably 40 interviews by different people. I'm actually one of them, and some of the people from one of the I forgot her name, from Ananda is also on there, and there's a lot of interesting things, and it's all free, so you might want to check on that. And I believe that's it. And then there's some of the books that I mentioned. So I'm sorry, oh gosh, I think you got